We'll start.
Yes.
Namaste and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Soulful Conversations by Soulful Journeys and Aranyachar. On Saturday, we met Mr. Sachin Satri, who gave us an insight into the real life of Wali tribes. It was interesting to learn about how these people live a simple yet so profound life in amidst the nature. And we learned that how nature plays a so important role in their everyday life. From water to air to trees to animals to food to soil to minerals and about everything. Uh, it is we have to respect the nature. It is our prime duty to keep it safe and clean and to raise the awareness to protect, maintain, and conserve natural resources and their habitats. We are celebrating World Nature Conservation Day tomorrow on 28th July. And on this occasion, one person that I can always think about is Mr. Kedar Bhide.
Hello.
He is the one person who admires nature, be it jungles, snow-clad mountains, or deep oceans. He has not just explored them all, but has been diligently working towards saving the ecosystem. Mr. Kedar Bhide is an explorer, wildlife photographer, and a herpetologist. Hence, he is primarily associated with snake conservation in India through his initiative, Zero Bites. He is the founder of NatureWorks India, a printing venture in Mumbai, which helps you print your photographs by using the latest technologies. Being an avid traveler, he is one person who is just happy being outside, and he is most happy when he is with his animal friends and especially with reptiles. He has also reported two snake species from first time from India. To know which one are they, let us hear his travel stories and what inspired him to concentrate on wildlife and photography. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Hello, sir. Welcome to our session, and we are very happy to have you here. So, my first question for you today is going to be, can you tell us a little more about your life journey and how you became a part of wildlife? Was there a particular moment where you decided that henceforth I'll be a part of wildlife and photography, and you would explore this with a very passionate interest?
I think, Aniket, if I go back around, it's now nearly 3 decades. I'm connected to a biology or a nature or a wildlife field as such. But I don't remember any kind of those lightning moments, like suddenly I felt I will get into wildlife. It's first started as a kind of co-curricular because I did my graduation in zoology and then I was doing my post-graduation by research with Hufkin Institute, which was snake and antivenoms and all those part of my whole academics. So the snake started because of my kind of a co-curricular interest and my MSc was into that subject with Hufkin Institute. And then I started getting more into snake as such. So my whole wildlife journey and travel and exploration, everything started for snakes. I haven't seen a tiger nearly 10, 12 years after I got into the field of wildlife. That happened afterwards when I became a photographer. I started with a researcher first and then working on snakes and a kind of a snake rescuer and conservation of reptiles. So my photography started for photographing snakes because in 90s there were not many good pictures of snakes except some books by Nilim Kumar Khere. We used to copy the pictures of that book for our slideshows and used to have those transparencies that time. Today you all do digital, but we have those projectors and everything. So I started photographing basically for snakes and documenting them to use for my education and awareness purpose. And that's how first 8-10 years I was only working for snakes. And then that photography became a more passion out of that documentation. Then probably that time I started looking at other wildlife.
Right.
And getting into more into other different landscapes as such. So I don't think there is a kind of a lightning moment, but probably from my childhood, in a family there are always some adventurers, and my father was always interested in oceans and shales and seashores, where my aunt is always much interested into mountains and expeditions and climbing. So I have seen that from my childhood, so was always interested. started with snakes, and then I think became into more into other areas too. But still, the soul is snakes.
Right.
All my travels.
Absolutely. So, sir, can you tell us about a childhood memory you have with the snake? Since we are speaking about
My schooling, primary schooling, like probably from second standard to eighth standard, was done in a small place called Dahanu, which is on Maharashtra-Gujarat border. My
Right.
father was posted there. He had a transfer job. So we had a house which was huge, kind of a vada. It has some 20 rooms where we were staying only in 4 rooms. Other rooms were kind of locked, and they were like granaries.
Right, sir.
The rooms never used to get a light inside the house in a day at 12 o'clock. Also, that kind of house it was, and we used to always get snakes in that house.
Right.
And we never had any kind of fear, or we never had any kind of accident or something. We used to see them, and they used to come and go whenever they are moving around the gardens and all those things. So probably that, and then ocean, because the Dahanu is on the sea coast. So the ocean was like every morning, afternoon, evening, it was seashore.
Right.
My school was on the seashore. So it's a rural school. So all the toilets used to be open on the seashore. There was
Right.
not like a built-up toilet. So
Right.
every time it's on seashores kind of thing.
Right.
So my childhood memories for nature was seashore, and probably snakes coming into my house and other animals, birds, seeing around that. So that was my childhood memory about wildlife and nature as such.
Right, sir. So you started doing photography and your wildlife travels, especially for snakes and other species, at a time where, like you said, in the 90s, when like information now is right on our fingertips. We can check out what the distance between two destinations is via Google Map. There are blogs about it. There's so much of information which is easily accessible. You started exploring at a time where this information and, for that matter, bookings or logistical, I think there were lots of challenges. How did you cope up planning expeditions and executing them when there were these logistical issues in place?
We at the moment, Aniket, feels that those were logistic issues that time, but resources which we have that time, we never felt it's an issue that time. It's now we are thinking that probably we had those issues that time, because now we are too much on a virtual. There are Google, and you can search a lot. But that time our resources was other people who have gone into those areas, and there used to be all those printed maps and books, and those used to be cherished. Like we used to have a collection of those maps. I still have a collection of the roads maps and all those. You probably, nobody had seen a paper road map of Mumbai. I probably still have it with me, and the Pune also as such. So we used to collect all those informations from the people who have gone there. Or many times we have also done there is in Mumbai, there is a books bazaar, old bazaar in Fort. So every Saturday, Sunday, half the time is to go and explore the books, and many times we used to get a lot of good things there, which is like a Google for us. So we have connected or found out different authors, different books written on those areas. So our all studying used to be may not be on a virtual world, but in the physical world. But most of the times, it's all about mouth to mouth. Somebody has gone there, call them, and people used to help each other that time. Not like today that I haven't gone, I will not tell where I stayed and all those things. People used to be very open to share about where they stayed, what they did, and who is the contact person there, and what's the phone number. So it was very open word that time, and we used that with our resources to means we used to always have some experience where people are not ready to share also, like today, but majority wise it was open, and I will say the literature was a lot. Today we have a lot of virtual literatures, but you don't validate it. You may have a wrong information also. But that time, whatever literature we had was validated, published, written by somebody. And still, it was new when we go into a particular area, and it was surprises. But we had some kind of preparation with others' experience. So probably I will say that for us, the better way was others' experience and get it from them. We lost your voice, Aniket.
Yeah, sorry, I hadn't gone on mute. So I wanted to ask you, like you said, you were doing expeditions back then. in the 90s, you were documenting species of snakes, and so you were carrying a lot of heavy camera gear. You were going to remote locations, and there was a very tedious expedition ahead in front of you. So, was there any particular story you want to share with us where you were? There were a lot of challenges, but as such, it was, you found that it connected you as a traveler with the landscape and the people.
Probably it's more on the weather. When
Right,
you're
sir.
going to a particular area, the challenges, particularly as you are asking me about a photography.
Right,
And when I'm working on the reptiles, most of the time I'm into areas in monsoon, in Amboli or Agumbe, or maybe Arunachal. Arunachal is throughout the year, it's raining. So
right, sir.
preparation was mainly about how do you keep your cameras dry, or how do
Right,
you, because of the whole photography and everything. And that was challenging where I will take a word from my friend and who I have learned a lot from, Ashok Captain, that sometimes plastic is good. We have learned it that way. People may not agree with me, but particularly in the areas where it's raining 24 hours, then
right,
the
sir.
plastic bags was our only savior that time to save our cameras and lenses, and still I think probably. But we have gone to extreme, like carrying silica gels with us, frying it every night, keeping cameras into the silica gels. Those were one of the challenges of the photography as a photography challenge. And probably that time we were using rolls.
Yeah, film
So
rolls.
taking care
Yeah,
of those rolls, and it's like a ration. We cannot shoot 100, 2000 kind of a frames per day. We have
right,
to be really, really careful about what we are shooting, because we don't want to finish our rolls. We are there, and we are not going to get those rolls there in that locality, for some time. So the preparation was very, very important about how many rolls, what are you going to shoot, how you're going to take care of your cameras, Arunachal to everywhere, Even
right.
Tadoba, I remember we used to go that time in summer, and Tadoba temperatures in summer.
Yeah,
So I don't know how many of you know, there used to be a thing called Yuvak Nivas in Tadoba, which is at the moment a poor area,
right,
and we used to stay in that Yuvak Nivas dormitories. There used to be a water cooler. That's the only blazing kind of thing in that heat, there.
right,
So I remember taking my rolls, putting into a plastic bag, tying it and dipping it into that cooler, because we used to worry about at that temperature, these rolls, may get overexposed, get spoiled. Nothing happened, but it was worried at that time. So those kind of things while photography we used to do. About ourselves, preparation is like, if you're going to Arunachal, you need to aware about that it's a malaria prone area, and there are leeches and there are mosquito bites, and you
right,
need to take care of probably prophylaxis of malarial things.
right.
I still remember I had to come back from Namdapha halfway because I had a very high fever for 3 days, and I was worried about it's going to be a malaria, because my subject was malaria and others. So I was more concerned. When you study more, you are more concerned about something.
Absolutely.
So I have to come back halfway from Namdapha in 98, 97, 98 probably, I think, that time, and worried. And when I reached back to Bombay, I didn't have a fever. So it happens. So you have to
Yeah,
prepare for each and every eventuality and
right,
emergencies into any of the areas which you are going. You have to prepare fully. You cannot do laziness saying, "Yaar, itna kyun weight leke jaun?" Because
right.
you reach there, if you miss something, you may regret it of not carrying things there. So probably we used to be overpacked, not like today where you do a light. We used to be quite overpacked, but
Right.
we used to prepare ourselves a lot when we used to go into remote areas for any eventualities.
Absolutely. So, like you said, you have been doing photography beyond the typical sphere of wildlife tourism as we know it, which is primarily now come to wildlife photography, rather, which is primarily limited to the mammals and, in the central landscape of the Indian subcontinent, so to say. You've explored species documentation with snakes in Northeast and a lot of other remote places. You have done a lot of stuff with frozen lakes and frozen landscapes in the Himalayan region. You have done underwater photography, and I'm sure birding photography in Costa Rica, for example. So, how did you, start? What was it about those particular landscapes that inspired you to come and visit and document the photography subjects? Can you share a little about each landscape? What was your driving factor there? And what did you enjoy the most while being, for example, in Ladakh or while doing your underwater
Okay.
photography?
Okay. Let's start with the Ladakh, the high altitude, because I'm covering it for last 12 years. And
Right.
what happened is that when I was doing a lot of work on snakes and going into Arunachal and everything, in some of the expeditions, I have, teared some of my ankle ligaments and everything. So doctor at that time told me, don't walk on uneven ground, you know,
Okay, sir.
because there's nothing you can do about those ligaments. Those are gone, kind of, on the things. So, every time you need to have some objective in your life where you forget that pain of ankle pain. So I decided I will document all wildlife protected areas about 10,000 feet in India.
Wow.
And I gave it a very big name called HAPA, High Altitude Protected Area Documentation.
Wow.
And I studied the whole from Ladakh to Sikkim, and which are the wildlife sanctuaries, which are the national park, and I want to cover them water in my life, document them as a high altitude protected areas particularly.
Right, sir.
And I thought I will start with Ladakh because I had some friends there, and and thought I will go there and start working, because then I will forget this ankle pain and this monsoon and rain, leeches kind of jungles, and I'll go somewhere there is no monsoon also that time. The whole feeling was. So I started Ladakh for that Hapa.
Right, sir.
But what happened in the end is that I got stuck to Ladakh. I have not been able to complete a Ladakh in last 10 years. Forget about going into other high altitude areas yet, because it became my kind of a muse later, Ladakh. That is one. Second, about the underwater thing, I was always, attracted to oceans because of my childhood and everything. And I used to love doing shells, collect shells and study them during my college days and everything.
Right,
So
sir.
probably, but never had an opportunity to do a diving and buy, underwater housing for my camera, then do it. But it was always in back of my mind. So probably in a year when I felt like, no, I can buy underwater housing is expensive than the camera itself, so I can buy those equipment. Then I
Right,
did my diving, and then I started going to underwater, because if you see 80% of wildlife today is in oceans. What actually we see that we call ourselves a wildlifer on land, we actually haven't seen a wildlife at all. There is a more and more wildlife below those waters in oceans, an amazing kind of wildlife. And so so probably the underwater was very planned decision.
right.
I started getting, I can buy equipment, I can learn, I have a time to do that. I'm not a good swimmer at all. If somebody says that you need to be a very good swimmer to be a diver, actually, I will say if you're learning a diving, if you can't swim at the start at least, probably you will go underwater much faster.
Right.
Otherwise you will try to be above water as such. But
Right.
you need to be a good swimmer if you want to be a good diver, but doesn't need that you need to be really expert swimmer to become a diver as such. Till
Right.
you can float and you can survive in a water, you can do a diving with that. So I did that quite a plan. Ladakh happened because of frustration of working into the whole thing. Underwater happened with properly good planning as such.
Right. So you've been working specifically something that I remember seeing your photographs on the rock Agama at Somoriri. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Is it Somoriri or is it
Yeah, it's
Pangong?
temporary.
Somoriri. So Changthang Plateau, you've been working a lot and you've been going for several expeditions over the years, especially in the winter when it's the harshest climate. What are the challenges of photographing at such harsh conditions? Is it any different from doing it? So probably I'll put it in the summer. So at the start of the summer, not the peak tourism season, but is it different from doing it somewhere about in March versus in December? What are the changes? I'm sure you've seen the seasonal changes as well.
Okay, December, it's probably just the start of winter in Ladakh. So
Okay.
still it's quite a good
Hmm.
kind of environment. It's
Right,
seen
sir.
Ladakh in summer also in the night goes to 0 degree. And if it's a
True.
wind factor, so it's not like, So winter starts gradually in Ladakh, say across November, and then December, the lake starts freezing. And, you can start getting snow. And March is a kind of a late winter, but still you will have a frozen lakes and a lot of snow around in the Ladakh as such, particularly in the Changthang Plateau. But one thing, this definition of a harsh is depend on how you take it.
Right.
We feel it's a harsh, but the people are staying there, right?
Absolutely.
For if you ask them, is it a harsh environment? They will not agree with you. They stay there. It's their life. Whereas
Right.
they will say that your Mumbai environment is a harsh.
Very true.
So humid and kind of thing. So harsh is a relative term, and I will not use that thing kind of harsh. Yes, it's the coldest time there.
Right.
And if you love cold, you will love it. If you don't love cold, you probably hate it there. But what happens, in a cold, particularly a lot of wildlife into Changthang areas, it is more visible because they get little down in the lower altitude.
Right.
And because of a lot of snow and everything, you probably have a more chances of photographing them and seeing them. So it's more on an opportunity to see the wildlife which you hardly see in the summer because they are on the high altitudes.
Right. Right.
But once I started going to Changthang in the winter, the beauty of that landscape, I will say it's nothing kind of a harsh, but it's heaven.
Right.
You will see such a beautiful landscape there in winter.
Right.
The frozen lakes has become really, really kind of a muse for me, where I just love being around the frozen lakes because what it gives you, two things. One is a very beautiful landscape. Second thing is it's too much loneliness there because there are not people like travelers around. You see in the resorts and everywhere. Now it's happening. When I started around 12 years back, there were hardly 2-3 people I know who used to do the winter Ladakh, and who I learned from a lot. So we started doing that, and now a lot of people go there. But you understand how much self or how much confidently you can work because there's nobody else there.
Right.
And it gives you a freedom of thoughts, freedom of where your life is taking. So particularly going into a winter Ladakh is a mental challenge more than the physical. I will say it's more harsh mentally. To be lonely in that cold weather and doing your work and nobody to talk to in the nights or in the evenings, probably. Because everybody wants to get into those four, huge kumbhals near the Bukhari or the light and other things. But otherwise, it shows you some amazing, amazing heaven on earth.
Right. Absolutely. Sir, like you spoke about, when we look at the body of work you have done, you have traveled for exploration, you have traveled for species documentation, you have traveled for photography. You have also traveled for conservation, to create awareness, to teach people how to live better with a certain reptiles. I would like you to share how this journey with snakes started. Like you said, you have already mentioned that you've always lived around snakes since your early childhood. How did you get into teaching and creating awareness about this? How did that journey from Hafkin Institute, where you were working on antivenom, turn into awareness and mitigation, and how have you traveled with respect to that? If you could share something.
The snake was always an interesting topic for me because, it's a very charismatic animal. There is a fear as well as there is a lot of people likes it, but they hate it also, and there's a fear for it as such. So that was the most ill-respected group of animals, I will say, across all the wildlife which we have, because of the fear factor. And when we started working on it long back in 90s, and then there used to be a lot of need of, people used to kill snake whenever it is around. So we started more working on a snake rescuing. Probably, if I look back now, we were doing a human rescue than the snake rescue as such that time. Because humans are afraid of a snake. We were taking snake from somewhere and releasing it somewhere. So it was more human rescue. We call it a snake rescue. So I started in 90s. We did a small organization called Reptile Rescue and Study Center in Gorai in Borivali. The short form was RRSC. A lot of people remember RRSC of those work which we did. So we did typical those, it's a flow of a lot of people working in a snake. They start snake rescuing, they start snake handling, they start doing snake shows, over the years. But many of the times it starts with snake handling, snake rescue, and snake shows, and also ends there itself. They don't go beyond to probably the study animal conservation act. For conservation is saving the snake, but conservation is not only saving a particular that animal from the getting killed or anything, but probably working with people about coexisting with that animal. I think that is more conservation than saving a particular animal with it as such. So probably what happens over the journey, we in Marathi, we call it, we have become Valya ka Valmiki. So I have done all those crimes of snake handling, snake shows, and everything in my earlier days, with the belief that live snake shows are needed for education. We should
Right.
take live snakes into schools and colleges and groups, camps like what you do now,
Right.
and tell people. I have done so many live snake camps in Borivali, where people used to do the adventure camps.
Right.
Taken all those snakes, but then somewhere around 2003 and 4, two things happened. One, because of my silly mistake, I got bitten by a cobra, and I was in a hospital for 2 days and survived. I did probably, I think I told doctor how to treat myself in the hospital also, because they were also not knowing much about it. But then I have understood that one, and second, we did one survey in the schools where we have done a live snake shows, and we did survey in a schools where we have done only slideshows. And then the results were so mind-blowing, Aniket, that we understood in 2003-4, after doing those surveys, that wherever we had done the live snake show, hardly 5 to 10% students have understood what we are telling them. Everybody's attention was only on the live snakes. So it was more entertainment than education. And where we had done only the slide show, we have got nearly 70% right answers in the surveys from the children, what we had told them about snakes. So 2004, first thing which we started as a RRSC is to tell people not to do live snake shows.
Right.
And so I had a lot of resistance from, lot of seniors in the group and everything, that are you going to give us projector to everywhere? Are you going to do slide? How are we going to get that? And this is the best education. But ultimately in 2006 and 7, some people came forward and it started reducing, because we started working on a demand reduction more than the supply, and we started telling schools and colleges not to do it instead of going and telling snake rescuers not to do it. So it started working on that. And at the same time, because of my bite incidents, and I saw the conditions of hospitals, and probably I'm more afraid of getting admitted into government hospital general ward than getting bitten by a snake today. Right. It's not a good situation in our health system today. Also, we know about pandemic, and it happens. So what I started working more in those days is about educating people who are working with snakes. We have a huge list of snake friends who have died with snake bite in Maharashtra.
Right.
That is all because of either a snake handling or a wrong rescue practices. But most of the time it's a display and show off, and they get beaten, and they die eventually and everything. So we started working on that, and that's how the Zero Bite campaign started. First, to all the rescuers, that when rescuing, you should not get bitten. It should be Zero Bite. So we started with a slogan that you are the hero if your bite count is 0. That kind of slogan was started that time. And ultimately, we started working towards creating SOPs for rescue. And Maharashtra, I think, is the first state who had a SOPs for snake rescue done by the Forest Department publications, which happened in 2018, by the way. Not like it took 10-15 years to get something working on these levels as such. But ultimately, the goal after 2007-8 was the reduction of a snakebite death in India. We have more than 50,000, 60,000 people die with snake bites every year in India. We are talking about some 26,000 deaths with the corona now. But every year we have 50, 60,000 deaths because of snake bites, and loss of limbs for nearly 200,000 people who either lose their hands or legs. It's a huge, huge mortality morbidity issue as such. Until you don't sort it out, I don't think we have any rights to go and tell people who are challenged because of this snake bite situation in our rural areas to tell them not to kill snake.
Absolutely.
And so we started working more on the snake bite death mitigation in rural areas by education and awareness creation, training doctors, all those things under Zero Bite campaign there. And there are a lot of people who are doing really good work in this. And we hope that next 10 years we'll make some changes into our rural areas. But as you are talking about traveling to those rural areas for conservation issues, I think everybody who is doing a conservation should travel into rural areas. With our urban mind, we are not a good conservators.
True.
We have a complete urban mindset, which is a more consumer mindset, and we need to go to rural areas, understand rural concepts more, and then understand what is conservation and what we should take that conservation to very level. Most
Right.
of us get into cities and try to advise and guide. But my
True.
traveling in rural areas have taught me one thing, that keep open mind, learn new things. You will find probably a much new information when you go into those areas and travel locally.
Right.
Not like travel on Google, sitting on that what happens into that particular, but go locally. And the challenges are very different than what we think. So those
True.
travel explorations for conservations are eye-opening, and I wish that everybody should do that. When you are into conservation, you should at least once or twice in a year travel into the locations where your conservation is going to matter.
Right.
What we talk about a city is urban biodiversity conservation is very different than wildlife conservation, which we look at into the cities. What urban biodiversity we have is a kind of a different wildlife. It's adopted wildlife to the cities as such. And what we have into the rural and our really pristine wildlife areas is very different.
Right.
So that travel to be exploring facts.
Right, sir. Kedar, sir? The network. Yes. Kedar, sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. So we are back. So I would like to know when we were speaking about this from learning from the community and unlearning from them. Traveling locally is now the need of the hour, like you said, and to experience things from the locals' perspective. But there's another counter argument to this is not everybody can actually eat like a local, live like a local, and stay like a local. So I think it takes a lot of time to adapt to that environment. Like if I'll just give you an example of what I wish to convey is tomorrow if I go to Himalayas, I probably cannot live the lifestyle of a Sherpa. I can't probably climb even if I want to, or I can't go on their diet, or I can't adopt the practices that they do. But yet we need to be respectful and be accommodating to the culture and find a way to merge with it. I'm sure you've worked with tribes in the Northeast, you've worked with tribes in Central India for that matter. So with different issues, sometimes for photography, sometimes for snake rescues. How has that experience with community members where the exchange of knowledge is there, but at the same time, you may not agree with something, maybe a custom or practice, or maybe any sort of a lifestyle thing, yet you are respectful towards it. How can you strike that balance for travelers?
The best thing to strike that balance is keep your judge mindset or a judging mindset in your home back. Stop judging everything. There are always different facets to every item which you go into different cultures. And you start judging with your own framework as such. Then it's become challenging.
Right.
So
Sir.
be neutral first. Start accepting it is there. I'm not saying you need to blend with them. Probably that's a challenging. You don't need to go and blend. You have your own identity. You can keep it there, but don't try to change them.
Right.
That's became because many times people go and try to change those cultures.
True,
But
true.
that's a very what you say, the very skewed view of our travel and what we look into that. Like let's take an example. If you go to Northeast, most of the tribes eat whatever moves. For them, you start teaching about you should not eat this, should not eat that. That becomes a challenge. When I did my work in the Northeast and I was staying with tribes in their homes, I wasn't staying somewhere else and going and working there.
Right.
I also understood one thing, that asking your host about what they have cooked for you is a kind of insult.
Okay.
So then many times I have accepted that and I haven't asked what they have for me. Probably I have eaten a lot of things which I wouldn't have been comfortable eating if I know what it is.
Right.
Okay. But it's not because I was trying to blend with them, but I just don't want to insult them there. And probably if I know that I may have an issue of eating something, I will say I'm not hungry, or my stomach is not good shape, so I probably kind of thing. But I will not say that I don't like eating these kind of things, because cultures are different in everywhere. But at the same time, if I go to Ladakh and with Changpas I am staying in that, probably there they don't mind asking them what you are cooking, and and I don't want to eat this kind of thing, because it's okay for them, because there, as it is, the resources are less and the food items are less,
Right.
kind of thing. So it all happens about be neutral. You don't need to really try to blend with the communities, but don't start judging them by your standards.
Absolutely.
You need to have both ways neutrality. Probably because sometimes community also starts judging you about how you behave,
True. Very true.
and it happens both ways. So you need to be really neutral when you go there, and you need to find your touch points with the community where they start accepting you as you.
Right.
Don't go overboard also, because once you go overboard, they understand that you are just doing it for the sake of show off.
Right.
One thing is that never also feel that the community people are dumb. Probably they
Right.
understand you more, and they will understand exactly what's happening with you more than you
Absolutely.
think what's happening with them, kind of thing. And so it's more on the humanity and compassion which you need to show to the community. I will never say that you should go and blend with the culture.
Hmm.
If you're going to go and completely transfer, you're there and going to stay there for your life, then
Right.
yes, probably. But as a visitor, it's not your job to blend with the culture, but understand theirs.
Right.
Don't judge it, be neutral, accept it as they are,
Right.
and take that experience of that culture. So probably good things of that culture will make your own life much better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So we have a couple of questions which have come in on Facebook. I'll try and get into those, and then we'll continue again. Wait, let me just scroll up. So Bhavna asks a question saying, "What's been your most memorable moment during underwater photography?"
There are many, but one of the best moment when I was doing underwater photography in Bali, and I was dying with a group at a different level. And you always have these dream spaces or a bucket list. Whatever you do, I still
Right.
have. You need to be
Absolutely.
neutral. I agree with that completely. You don't need to, but like a lot of people wants to see a tiger. My bucket list in underwater was manta ray. It was my dream
Right.
species where I wanted to see them. Forget about photographing first. I just wanted to see them.
Right.
So in Bali, in underwater, there is called cleaning stations. Like we have railway stations.
Right.
There are cleaning stations where these big spaces like sharks and manta rays, they come and they park, and there are small fishes who go and clean everything in their mouth and on their body, any parasites and everything. So it's literally, you can see the fish comes and stops at some place near some rocky or near the corals, and the fish
Hmm.
cleans it. It reverse back, goes back, another fish goes in the same position and stops there. With
Wow.
manta ray, those things happen. So in Bali, we saw this whole activity of a manta ray.
Right.
And probably I will not people may not believe it, but my eyes were moist underwater.
Wow.
But it's possible because you have those dive goggles and your eyes are dry as such. But by seeing those manta rays, and that was my most precious moment of a till now underwater journey, which I'm done very small. There are friends of mine who has done amazing underwater work. I am very, very junior in those field at the moment. But that manta ray sighting, and I have been able to photograph it, was one of the most momentous, kind of thing in underwater photography for me in Bali. I will never forget that moment where this whole 24 feet wide manta ray gliding above me, and I'm kind of 5 feet, 6 feet away from it, stationary and just going above my head.
Right.
It was beautiful.
Right. So Vimal Parmar asks, "How does one get over the fear for snakes?"
See, the fear is in my language. Bimal Bhai is very senior to me who's asking this question. Fear in my language is a false evidence appearing real, FEAR.
Wow.
So it's about just getting to know about them, remove that false evidence from your mind. Whatever you have, that all that it takes badla and it is something, it's just an animal, like any
Right.
other animal. There are some venomous snakes out there who bites. Sometimes they do envenomation and people can lose their life if not treated. But snake bite as such is not a very, very dangerous thing. Like I'm talking about 50, 60,000 deaths because of snake bites, but it happens when there are around 2 to 3 million people get bitten and then this many deaths as such, you know. So it's not so worrisome, and it's all about what we have learned into our traditions and culture and historically that snakes are dangerous, kind of. But it's just a false evidence appearing real. If you just remove that false evidence into facts, probably you will reach that far, you know, that facts appearing real, but they are real, and you will lose that fear. But my thing is that I don't want people to lose their fear and start them loving snakes, you know. All the objective is not to change people from fear to love.
Yeah,
you know?
Agreed.
The objective is to change people from fear to respect.
Absolutely.
You know, so respect the species, give it a distance. I'm not asking people to go and hug snakes or handle them or anything at all, but just don't fear them such a way that it creates a very bad impression about a particular animal.
Right. So I think we should treat snakes as they were our elders, you know, with love and respect, but from a distance. We don't want to get too close to them and get over friendly where, you know, it becomes an issue for us. So something to that line. So Vimalji asked another question saying, can you share your story of the very first snake rescue experience?
It's not such a good story, but as it has been asked about the first snake rescue was done in, I think, 1990 or 91 probably. In my colony, I've seen a rat snake, and I know it's a rat snake, it's a non-venomous snake because I've studied them. But I have never handled snakes as such that time, you know. So I went and I tried to, you know, kind of catch it and put into a bag, and it was a very, very, in today's standard, it was a very, very pathetic rescue attempts. Finally, after half an hour, with foot sweating of me, and that rat snake had bitten me twice on my leg, and then it went into a bag kind of thing. But I learned a lesson that you need to really, you know, understand about handling them if you want to get into rescue, and knowing the behavior of an animal more than just showing a kind of a machogiri and going try to catch it, you know. So after that, probably I went to Pune Snake Park, did volunteering there, learned a lot about snake behaviors and animal behaviors as such. So then my rescue improved. I will not say rescue again. My catching of snake improved that time. But the first experience was very bad. It's like I will say, what I'm doing, you know, I will never get back into this kind of thing. Such.
So, Bhavna has another question for you. How has the response of community members been towards the awareness that you have created towards snakes? So,
which community members? You are, let's have this rural community or urban community members.
I believe her answer would be somewhere towards the forest communities. I believe.
Okay, basically, I will say rural communities or village communities. They are very well acceptable for them. You know, they are seeing snakes around them a lot. It's, you know, and many of the time they don't kill it. I have seen old people just trying to push the snakes with the stick away from their house. You know. And there are many stories I've heard with a lot of my village friends, everything, where they come saying, this cobra is always there kind of thing, you know. It comes and goes and it doesn't do anything. So they are more acceptable to the snakes being around them than the urbanites as such, you know. And urban people, because I work also into cities and everything, I see more fear of snakes in urbanite than the rural people as such. And though more people die in the rural areas with snake bite than the urban area, but they have more acceptance to all the biodiversity around them than what we have in urbanites.
Absolutely. So, is there a challenge specifically with rural audiences about dispelling myths? So, they have these certain myths or superstitions that they connect with different snakes or seasonal changes that happen, that some snakes are seen then, and then they connect it to a story or a folklore. So, how hard is it to convince them? As folklore might be good or bad, there might be some incidences where the folklore is negative towards the species. So, how does one try and tackle it? It might not work, but sorry.
Yeah. So, Aniket, the thing is that many of the folklores, if you start studying them, you will find how they must have started. Okay, the source probably you will get it somewhere,
Right.
and try to find some logic or a science or a facts about what must have happened to start that kind of folklore. And with the whole audience, when you want to explain them, you cannot just go and tell them ki ye galat hai, this is wrong, kind of thing. They will not they will never accept it, because it's throughout their whole generations and everywhere it is there. But probably if you find out certain logic and facts and try to explain them in their language about why this must have happened, they understand it. Now I will give you two examples. Let's take a snake, because I work with rural areas on a snake. One is about snake takes revenge. You kill a
Right.
you kill a nag, and nagin will come and take Marathi त्याला डूब धरणं म्हणतात. And all those stories are there always.
Right.
So if you explain them logically that if it's a mating season of snakes and somebody would have killed a female snake, there are probably pheromones lying around, because female snakes releases pheromone to attract mate
Right.
during the mating season only. And maybe somebody would have seen another snake came for the pheromone there.
Right. Right.
And then related to that, saying that, okay, you killed one and the other snake came there. And
Right.
then start explaining to them, and they said, oh, I know, I have seen this only happening in July or May,
Right.
and you start connecting those dots for them, that what can be the fact. This is a one, example of how do you communicate with the communities about folklores.
Right.
And folklore is about the Nagmani,
Yeah.
Everywhere people talk about Nagmani, that you have these Nagmanis. So many of the times I have these stories that I was walking in a jungle and I saw this whole cobra, and they have a Nagmani on the head. And
Right.
I put my torch there and everything, and it started shining, You
Hmm.
see all these stories, particularly Pardis where we are working, you see all those stories also with them,
Right.
So I wanted to understand how it must have started. So what happened, if you go in a wild or you work with snakes, you understand snake mold. It's
Right.
diasis. Kaat takna म्हणतात ज्याला मराठीत. They take
Right.
the
Right.
outer layer of skin out because it's their physiological need to do that. In that. So what we did is that many times if there is no moisture, the pieces of this skin is stuck on the snake body.
Okay.
It doesn't remove, particularly on the eye and a head part. If there are no moisture, many times you get a snake where 5-6 different molds are stuck on the eye and the head also.
Right.
That remove. So what I did is that I took that piece of a molted skin and I studied its refractive index.
Right.
Okay, and it's more than water.
Wow.
You still today take a molted skin piece and with a slanted angle, put a torchlight on it, it will shine back like a diamond.
Wow.
And then you start explaining, then community to that probably this skin part was stuck on the body and some light in this angle, you saw it shining.
Right.
You know, same thing happened because people say there is a Dadiwala Saap, Muchwala Saap, 1,000-year-old snake, But probably these pieces of molted skin is stuck on the body, looks like a hair from the far away,
Right.
So you start getting into those facts, into their mindset, telling them that this is because of this is because of this. And then they will start. I remember for some years, I have done this experiment in the rural area where I have carried a molten skin with me and showed them by putting torch.
Right.
Slanted angle in the darkness, that how it reflects. It's a very shining piece.
Right.
So probably all these things must have some facts and some truths to start that folklore. But it's typically human mind, my masala to lagana hai, and then probably somebody put more masalas there, and then you start getting all these stories.
Right.
So I always try to find out what can be the logic thing in the back. You may get a story where there is no logic at all. It's only somebody had created to create importance from them, like mantrik and tantriks, They
Right.
create a lot of importance from themselves by creating all these stories.
True.
There is no logic in that. So that there you have to be very, very stern. And so it all depends on what scenarios you have to handle,
Right.
Sam, Dam, Dandabhed, you have to use all those things when you are doing awareness programs.
So, related to folklore, we have another question, especially with Nag Panchami just gone by. A lot of time we come across videos where humans are feeding water to a snake in a bottle. Or what are your views on that? This question has been asked by Meera Thosar.
Okay, hi Meera. Now she knows the answer, but now she had asked me the question. Probably I have to give the answer here. Snakes for their life need water to drink.
Right.
So in summer seasons, if somebody has a snake and tries to pour the water, probably snake will try to drink if it's thirsty. Otherwise not. But you don't need to really pour water on its head. Just put into a water nearby. It will, if it's thirsty, it will drink. In Nag Panchami, what happens particularly when people see these drinking milk and everything, these snakes have been caught many months before the Nag Panchami, and they have not been given any food or water to eat or drink at all. So on Nag Panchami day, many of these snakes are so thirsty that probably they will also drink chas, thumbs up, Coca-Cola if you give them and you offer them instead of milk also.
Right.
But all these people and these videos are coming with, they are pouring water and you see snake trying to drink it. In summer season, if it's too much dry area and snake is thirsty, probably snake will drink water, but not because you are pouring it on its head, because it's just there and it has to drink. But it's a bad way to treat a snake, putting a water on their head.
Right.
But snake needs water to drink. They get also thirsty and they need water to drink.
Right. Sandeep Kohli has asked, is it possible for you to share a couple of your favorite photographs and the stories behind them? I think we'll take it towards the end. Because Deepti has a set of quick question and answers, which I think she should take up now. And after that, if we have time, we'll try and address Mr. Sandeep's question.
Okay.
Deepti, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Aniket. Okay, that was such a wonderful session. When you were talking about the underwater experiences, I thought I went back to watching the Disneyland movies of underwater, fish life and etc. Yeah, so let me quickly, this is what we do as a rapid fire question round, and you have to quickly answer.
Do I get any prizes?
Yes, sir, probably I can come to your home and drop some gift hampers.
Cool.
Okay, so the first question is, which is your preferred excursion? Is it forest, mountains, or beaches?
That's a too tough question. I will say all three.
Okay. Absolutely. And you travel so much in different landscapes. I think it must be very tough for you to actually, pin to one particular thing that what can be my favorite.
Yeah, all three are different and all three, there is no comparison at all in all three.
Absolutely. So, which is your preferred medium of expression? Is it poetry or is it photography?
Probably photography.
Okay, and we have definitely seen so much of your photographs that we know how you try to narrate your story and let people know what is actually happening in that wildlife.
But that should be the objective of every photography, to tell stories.
Yes, exactly. I think photograph is that medium where you express yourself or express what is in your mind, and if you want to convey a message. And as we say that a photograph says more than 1,000 words, so that I think is the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, but it's like you have to take the photograph in such a way that it will really explain. Otherwise you need to write 1,000 words below photograph to explain what's in the photograph.
Yes, we should not go to what media shows us, like, from one angle and then from another angle. So your preferred subject of photography, snakes or butterflies?
Nowadays, butterflies more. I haven't shot snakes for many of the years, because, snake photography is a tough thing, because you are harassing stray snakes. You cannot just go in a wild and you have to isolate a snake, stop its movement, not allowing it to go. There are a lot of ethical methods involved in the snake photography. So I will only do probably a snake photography if I have to do a documentation of it, or if I have not seen that species before. I will not photograph a snake species which I already photograph again and again, because I know I am troubling a snake. But butterfly photography is more challenging, and as you know that my wife does a lot of butterflying, it gives me opportunity to travel with her into jungles also. So probably I will do more butterfly photography now than snake.
So, addition to this, butterfly or landscapes? Preferred subject of photography.
Okay, if you're adding that into the landscape.
Okay.
So how about landscape for like what I call it, a butterfly and then a huge landscape behind,
That's always I try to do. I call them a habitatscapes.
Yeah.
I give it a word called habitatscapes, and particularly in most of the landscapes which I try to photograph, I try to include the elements like animals there, or butterfly, or a plant, or a flower, anything, because that gives some definition to the landscapes too. And I always prefer that kind of photography more than just a plain beautiful landscape.
Yeah. And even so it is actually a good thing where you can actually do a macro photography and then still include their habitat. And I think that picture frames are really beautiful when you are actually showing a very close up of that.
A lot of people need to start doing that, because you show animal in its habitat, because animals, its relation with its habitat, that makes that animal unique. You cannot take animal and take it a studio kind of photograph, and say that you never know where that animal is and what you are doing it. So always take it with the background or some habitat where you have a place to move in with the animal to experience how they are living.
Yes, absolutely. So next question is an area you want to learn or explore next.
Probably, I do Ladakh, Tibetan Plateau, Changthang. Aniket also knows for last many years. But not many of us know that there is a huge Tibetan Plateau in Sikkim and Arunachal too. And not many people travel in that area. So my next goal is going to be document the Tibetan Plateau of Sikkim and Arunachal more, in winter again. But again, today, probably that area is like I was trying to do Ladakh 15 years back, Even on Google, I am not getting a lot of information, and I need to do a physical resourcing now to understand about those areas more and find out contacts. But that is the next step.
Yeah, right.
And underwater is still always there.
Yes. And underwater is an absolutely a new concept that I think we can introduce to people, that while you're doing scuba diving, just go ahead a little bit and, try to actually enjoy the corals and the fishes that are around you. And I think it needs more of understanding and a bit more of exploration.
Yeah, but as you guys all are into tour operators and travel organizers, promoting underwater tourism is a very, very more need of responsible tourism too, because today already the oceans are polluted with plastics, and people go with that kind of mind doing underwater tourism will be a lot of challenge. You need to be very careful when you are around corals, that you don't destroy the corals, you don't harm it, and there are no vehicles where you can sit inside. And there are some underwater subs in some famous destination where they take you out into that. But otherwise, if you're doing a diving, you need to be, I think, more responsible traveler than you are traveling into other areas at all.
Yes, absolutely. Or it will happen what has happened to the coral reefs of Australia, and they have over the years got degraded. And then
I understand that as a traveler, there is always a new frontiers, but every frontier has its own challenges, and you need to be very, very responsible. Probably if you are starting a more underwater now, you need to have your own self-controls about responsibilities and other things when you take travelers into those kind of areas at the moment.
Right. Sir, a book that you would recommend everyone to read?
Sorry, I can't hear you, Dipti. Loud.
Hello?
I can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay. Sir, a book that you would recommend everyone to read?
I generally read a lot of fiction, so I will not. But some of the books which, at the moment, if you are looking at, going into high altitude or Himalayas, there is a book called Wild Himalayas, and it's a very beautiful book. I will suggest that because it's not talk about the mountains, but it's talk about all those valleys and all those wildlife and the plantation there completely. It's written by what's his name, Tom Alter's brother, that or actor.
Right. Yeah.
I will get the name. I am still reading it, so I'm very what do you say? I don't remember the author's name very often, but I know the title. So Wild Himalayas, probably.
Stephen Alter. Stephen Alter. I also just Googled it.
Yeah,
It's
Stephen Alter. But Stephen Alter, and it's really amazing writing of our Himalayas, and quite a recent writing. It's a 2017 or 18 publication, I think. But if you want to understand communities, their relation with mountains and the wildlife and everything, that's one of the best book I can suggest today.
Right. I think, sir, and books were the only medium, a few years or a lot of years back where the travelers used to write down their experiences and then, and I think they were genuine experiences, not like made up of certain stories or new elements. And then people genuinely used to feel that even if we can't travel, but we can read that book and get that feel of actually traveling and experiencing what has happened back.
See, many of those books are there, and if you read them, they are lovely. You get the experience. But many times I have experienced this that many of the times author has, have become little fictional when they are writing. They put their own thoughts instead of writing just a travel log, and that becomes more interesting to understand their personal opinion and personal motives of traveling those areas. And but you need to be really careful about, because we know if you take two authors, Kenneth Anderson, because in wildlife everybody has read Kenneth Anderson, and Jim Corbett. Vast difference in both. One was it's called as a South India Jim Corbett, which is a very wrong saying. Kenneth Anderson had written his own things, but you can understand what can be a factual and what can be little fictional sometimes. I will not say fictional, or more dramatic writing. Jim Corbett is more dramatic, where Kenneth Anderson is more factual writing as such. So you need to understand when you read something about how the author is writing and take what's good out of it.
Right. So when we are talking about wildlife thing, so someone from the wildlife field that you actually look up to.
There are many people, particularly like if you take my snake field, two of the gurus which I look forward to is always Nilim Kumar Khaire of Pune Snake Park and Romulus Whitaker of Madras Crocodile Bank Trust. I've learned a lot from them, and they are still, always guide me and advise me on those two things. In photography, I actually like too many of photographs and photographers, but I like to explore my photography myself without following anybody as such. But in wildlife at the moment, only I think these two people I really admire and respect is Nilim Kumar Khaire and Romulus Whitaker.
Okay, sir. So, and the most beautiful snake according to you is?
Always Kaulbakis pit viper, which we reported first time from India, from Arunachal. And probably that's one of the most beautiful snake into all Indian snakes, I will say. Not many people will agree with me, and I also know there are many beautiful snakes around there, but I have an emotional connect with that snake, so probably I will say that's the most beautiful snake.
Right. So can you just repeat the names of the two snakes again, so that
one was Kaulbakis pit viper from Arunachal Pradesh. It was kind of a rediscovery and a first report from India. It was reported in 1934 by Colonel Kaulbaki in Burma before we reported from India. And second is a Sindh owl-headed snake from Rajasthan, where me and my another friend Dharmendra Khandal, due to in our travels into Rajasthan, we reported it from Rajasthan. It was earlier reported from Pakistan, but it was reported from India first time. That was in 2004-05. And I had a beautiful travel in Rajasthan with Dharmendra that time. He had taken me into, like as I said, that we have seen the rural areas and local communities by going to them and staying with them, not by Googling them. So,
right. So I have another question which has come in through Facebook. Sonali Date asks, Kedasji, planning to write any book to share your experiences?
See, planning and delivering are two different things. I'm planning it for last so many years, but I don't know when I will deliver it. So I will keep it hanging in between. It's in a plan.
Right.
But it will happen some year. I'm sure. I need to do that.
Right. Okay. So if you are okay with it, we would like you to share your screen and show Sandeep Kohli.
Give me a minute to get those pictures.
Sure. Please. In the meantime, I'll request everyone to go over to kedarbide.com. Sir has written a fabulous deal of his knowledge and some really interesting stories from field. People who are not very well versed with his blog, please go check it out. It's in the comment section on Facebook, shared by Bhavna. It is www.kedarbide.com. And uh, Kedar sir is also, as everybody knows, he's an amazing wildlife photographer. The one thing that which he has said to me and which now always is a part of my thinking whenever I pick up the camera is take a picture which you can print. If it is not worthy of printing, don't take that picture. So something that has always stayed with me and it has made me more conscious while clicking photos. I'm no longer trigger happy clicking 50 images of the same shot. I've become a little more conservative with that and I'm more mindful of the pictures that I take. So please also look up NatureWorks India. He has some amazing archival prints. And if you have a photo that you want to print out, blow up, and put it in your house or your office or gift it to someone, please get in touch with Kedar sir whenever you can. Kedar sir, are you ready? Yes. If you can just share the screen, there's a bottom button on Zoom.
1 minute, 1 minute. Just
Yeah,
fill-
yeah. Sir, Sandeep ji has another request. He
Yeah.
says vertical frames. He has specified.
Oh, he had said that I should show 2 vertical frames.
Uh, no, he has said share your most favorite photographs, and he just commented saying he is more looking to seeing vertical frames.
Okay. There are a lot, but let me say I have too many favorite photographs, but one is a vertical frame I would like to share.
Okay.
1 minute. How do I get back to the screen? Okay. And share screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Aniket, you probably will identify this with a lot of meaning, but this is Panna National Park and this is a Cane River there. And this is why I wanted to show you that probably if this Cane Batwa project goes ahead, you may not be able to see this landscape again.
Right.
It will be underwater, you know. And so the photography is one object also was to save those things which you may not see it again, you know, document things which were there and how a human being had, you know, destroyed those things. So one of the thing, because he asked for a vertical frame, otherwise I was going to show something else. But Sandeep said that this is a Cane River and particularly creating the depth in the particular picture to show the long, you know, the whole large area and the landscape under it is amazing thing. So one is this, and then I have a story which it's favorite because it tells as a photographer there are sometimes you have to be very careful about this is a winter Ladakh and why I'm telling you a story about why this picture is a favorite. You know, these all are wild Kiangs, the Tibetan Kiangs or a wild ass. You know, they are the amazing animal who stay at a high altitude into on the Tibetan plateau. So this was at Sokar, and in winter, probably out of all the lakes I've visited, Sokar is most worrisome place because it's in a valley, and both sides the wind is very high. So if you are into minus 15 or a minus 20 temperature, and if the wind starts, within 5 to 10 minutes that becomes minus 30, minus 30 or minus 40, you know, the chill factor multiplies your. And why I'm showing this particular picture, because it showed me the frail nature of a human body and a human thing as such, you know. I was photographing these wild Kiangs into Ladakh at Soka in the mornings. The temperatures were around -20 and -25, somewhere in between, you know. And suddenly my camera stopped working. And I was wondering what happened, you know. I tried checking my camera, but it wasn't working. I couldn't click the picture.
Right.
So I had this Scorpio which I was traveling, you know, and the engine is to keep running, because if you switch it off, it will never start back in that time. So
Right.
you cannot shoot from the vehicle vibrating, you know, you come out and shoot always on a tripod kind of thing. So I went back to my vehicle, took my camera, sat there. There was a heater in the vehicle, so put my camera. You should not do that, because it can condense water and, you know, spoil your camera. But just I was so desperate to see that my camera is not working, so I kept near the heater. And after 5 minutes, I went out and said, "Let me see if my camera is working now." So I put on tripod, and I was looking at my camera, my hand on the trigger, and trying to shoot, you know, just to shoot that whether the camera is clicking or not, without looking at any kind of landscape.
Right.
And then I understood actually camera was working perfectly fine. My fingers were not moving. You know, and that experience of looking at my fingers where my brain is saying that I'm clicking the camera, but my fingers are not moving, is kind of a jolt, you know,
Right.
to you, because you are completely sometimes get into your photography mode and forget where you are and what you are doing, you know, kind of thing. So my fingers have kind of a frost nipped. It's one stage before the frostbite, and that's why I couldn't move there. You know, so my fingers needed a heating than the camera itself, more on that. But once you understand what you get these kind of pictures, you know, it's challenging to work, but you need to show, and that's what the frailness of a human body, but strongness of a human mind, you know, because when you see these animals are happily enjoying that temperature, you know, without any clothing, without anything, and you are in 4 layers of clothing and still trying to survive, it tells you that yes, your mind is very strong, but your body is quite frail into those environments, you know. And you need to learn in your photography all these things, not only techniques. What matters is experience of taking that photograph. That's maybe photographically this picture may not be as good, but because of that experience behind it, is one of my favorite picture.
Right.
On this.
Right.
And another one, I am not showing a Kolbaki pit viper picture. I will probably show you, but again, sorry, I'm showing from my website because I wasn't ready while showing the pictures.
No problem.
I have done too much Ladakh, so probably you will see a lot of Ladakh experiments in this. I can't see that picture here. This is my another favorite picture from Ladakh. These are the frozen lakes completely. You know, this is Somoruri in the late evening light. And what happens, you know, when you're walking on these frozen lakes, you can walk on them and walk around and see what you want to photograph, make your different frames there. It's very, very cold and windy, so it's challenging to roam around for a long time there. But what happens, you know, when the lake freezes, the wind goes into all those cracks into the ice.
Right.
And somewhere they reach, and then the pressure is so much of a wind that that whole ice explodes like a bomb.
Okay.
And you get these tiles lying around where the ice explodes, you know, and they at a different temperature, the shape of ice is different, you know. In a very cold temperature, you'll get these tiles kind of ice. In little less temperature, you'll get those, you know, ice,
Icicles.
small icicles like a knife and other things. So it all depends on how water freezes. But you will get a beautiful landscapes if you go into winter Ladakh very, very well.
Right.
Now let's see another. I will show you Kolbaki pit viper, Aniket. I know you want to see that.
Of course, sir.
That's the snake which we reported first time from India, called Kolbaki pit viper. It's a pit viper, probably the largest pit viper in India, and kind of, it's a very, very intelligent snake and very, very famous in the Nishi culture as a local name called Barta. There are a lot of stories about this snake kills so many people, hundreds of people, and all those things. There are a lot of superstitions about this snake.
So we are not, sorry sir, but we are not able to see it. I think the screen has
Okay.
got frozen.
1 minute, 1 minute. Let me
Yeah.
check it.
So in case you have changed the application, you're no longer on the browser.
Yeah.
You'll have to reshare
Very
the screen. You'll have to close the sharing and reshare with that particular application.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Yes,
Perfect,
sir.
Sir. That's the Kolbaki pit viper from Arunachal, which is a kind of a favorite snake and a favorite images always, because there is a big story behind it about while achieving these pictures,
Right.
That's it. Otherwise, all my pictures are my favorite, and there are so many stories with every pictures, and it will take a lot of time to show all of them,
Right.
One of the pictures which I wanted to show but I couldn't find at the moment is taken at 9:20 in the night at a frozen Someriri. One exposure, but we'll talk by that time. I'll try to find it. So I'm stopping sharing, and you can ask me more questions.
Right. Let me just quickly go through Facebook again if there are any questions I missed out.
On my hard drive, that white hard drive on the back.
Yeah, we don't have more questions, but it is more about, people are appreciating and being surprised at your wonderful pictures. And that frozen lake picture was definitely mind blowing. I mean, you can't imagine that we can find something like that,
We always talk about Alaska, Siberia, and all those things, but after Siberia, the second coldest habited, where the people stay, place is in India. I don't think a lot of people know about this. The Kargil and Dras has recorded temperatures of -60.
Right.
Before.
Right.
Which is probably the coldest habitable place after Siberia in the world.
Wow, that is something that even we need to learn about.
Yeah, India has everything: the coldest, the desert, the shore, the mountains. You don't need to go anywhere else.
Yes, absolutely. And we being the tour operators, I think it is our duty to, let people know what is available here and not just to be confined to the very typical itineraries of, say 4 days of Jaipur and 5 days of Kerala or 4 days of Ladakh. I think there is so much more to explore in all the types of different landscapes. And I think it's going to be never ending.
Yeah. Should I look for that picture or we are Aniket?
Sorry, sir. I was on mute. We have about 10 minutes, sir. You can show the picture. After this, I just have one last question for you. That is going to be your message for audiences, generally about tourism, about conservation, and how to just go forward from here.
Okay.
What is your message for everyone? That's the only last question I'm going to take after this. So please go ahead, sir.
Let me, I'm just.
So one more question has come in from Bhavna. And apart from Ladakh, what was another challenging destination to shoot in?
Apart from Ladakh?
Yes.
Underwater is always challenging for photography. As a destination, probably, I think Arunachal maybe.
Right. And as you said, sir, it is not just a photograph, but is that overall experience which makes that photograph more memorable, or the picture perfect frame that photographers call it. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I have got that picture, so I can.
Sure, sir. So please do the share screen again.
Wow.
I don't think I have shown this picture at many of the platforms yet, as said.
Yes. Yes.
But this is not a sun. That's a moon on the top, and you can see a lot of stars around. This is a Somoriri lake, completely frozen, and that village you can see is a Karzok village, which you see in summer many times when you go to Somoriri, when you stay there. This was the coldest temperature I've ever been to Ladakh. As per ITBP log there is ITBP post there. Log, it was minus 42 of the night. And I could only shoot 2 frames before I lost sensation to my fingers. Both, even after 2 layers of gloves and everything. And this was a 20-second exposure. So, you have to be there. So 2 frames is 40 seconds. And to get this frame, I had to climb up nearly 300 feet above the village to get into a location. Even the local guide, my friend called Juma, who used to be always with me, he was with me. He said, "I'm not coming. You are mad. You go and take your pictures." That kind of situation. So I could only take 2 pictures. One of them is this at a very huge ISO of 1800 and short 20-second exposure into a full moon night of a frozen Somoriri with a Karzo. But I have lost sensation of my fingers for next 1 hour, even after Bukhari and everything, So the why this is my most favorite, because as I said, it's all stories and your experience of doing it. So this was long back when I used to have, I have carried, not today we have iPads and everything. I don't know how many people remember there used to be a small iPod only, very small one. So I had all the Arun Date and all the Marathi songs on that iPod. And after I lost sensation and I was sitting near Bukhari in a Karzo, I still remember listening to a song, Ya Jagneyavar, Ya Janmavar, Shatada Prema Karave. It's like you have to love your life 100 times what you are having it now. And I think this pandemic has also shown us that you need to love your life, whatever it is. So all this travel need to teach you about loving your life and loving others' life. So probably we get back to those, one of the, Aniket, what you want to ask me about.
Yes.
How the thing is that.
Yes. So moving forward with the pandemic, the whole situation, and in general life, I think you summed it up very beautifully about how we should live life and how we should travel. Deepti, I will take it, transfer the baton to you to end the session. And of course, thank you so much, Kedar sir, for joining us. Thank you for
Yes,
taking out the
Aniket.
time. Thank you for taking out the time despite your busy schedule. I know the last few days you've been extremely busy. Thank you for taking out the time today to share your incredible journey with us.
Thank you.
And Deepti, over to you.
Yes. Thank you, Kedar sir, for such a wonderful and informative session. And it has opened up I would say, the borders and the horizons of different landscapes and how we can enjoy, appreciate, and respect and conserve our nature, and how it can be still so beautiful. So thank you once again, sir, for such a wonderful session. And I hope to meet you very soon after the lockdown.
Sure. I need those, gifts for those rapid question fire, whatever you
Yes,
need.
sir, definitely. I'll get that for you. No worries.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
To all, please take care. Start enjoying your life, live your life, and don't stop traveling, whatever it comes. Travel is soul of human being. It's need of every human being. So take enough precautions, but travel.
Right.
Yes. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kedar sir, and thank you, Aniket. This had been a wonderful session. And on next Wednesday, we are going to hear some more exciting and thrilling stories. And next Wednesday, or the 29th, coming Wednesday, is International Tigers Day. And we have someone who's going to share his thrilling and daredevil stories of tigers. So stay tuned, follow our page. And we have also uploaded all the previous videos on my YouTube channel, Soulful Journey. So keep watching, and thank you. Stay safe and good night. Bye-bye.